Hello DG Lovelies! This is Neisha M, your Geek Mom, and welcome to another episode of Diversely Geek Discusses, a space between planes where fans explore the meaning of being geek, learn what it means to identify and embrace your inner geek, and how connecting with geeks across the globe can help us on our journeys to transforming our fandom passions into positive action. Good evening, DG Lovelies. This is Neisha M, your Geek Mom, coming to you with another episode of Diversely Geek Discusses. And we are about to embark on a really interesting, a really sophomoric maybe, an emotional journey, because we're about to talk to you about favorite cult classic films and why we love them. And I have my personal philosophy as to why I think we all connect to these cult classics that would normally never be considered as box office hits, but still have become iconic favorites with the fans because they mean so much to the fans. And really what we're going to do in this series, and we being Mollee B Marcus, amongst quite a few other amazing lovelies from the DG crew, we're going to just try to tackle understanding what is it that we're connecting to and why do we love these cult classics so much. Today we're just going to do a really short discussion about cult classics in general and how does something even become one of those, and why do you think entire cultures really embrace and generations, mind you. So it's cultures and communities, and then by generation and by age, embrace a particular film and then continue to do that, sharing it from generation to generation. As our great, amazing Mollee B Marcus says, cult classics are multi-generational. Woo!
They are.
And a very welcome to our Mollee. Yay! Thanks for being here.
Of course. Happy to be here. I love most movies, B movies, and especially cult movies. You know, whether it's Attack of the Killer Tomatoes or Rocky Horror Picture Show or Starship Troopers, you know, any of these, because one, you just love watching them over and over and over again. I think I've seen like Rocky Horror over 238 times.
Oh, sheesh, that's a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I used to go to the actual theater.
Yeah.
And at midnight all the time with my friends. And so that to me is also sharing, right? It's not just personal alone time viewing, but viewing it with others and commiserating in the reactions and enjoying the energy that is shared, whether it's laughter or yelling at the screen or whatever it is. You know, you're sharing it as a collective group. To this day, Rocky Horror, I think by far is one of the most amazing cult classics. You know, it was on Broadway and it did okay, but it wasn't like a multi-million bazillion thing like Endgame, you know, where it made so much money all at once. In fact, it kind of almost flopped. And with Rocky Horror, you know, there are people who still, to this day, every weekend, will go to a theater if it's playing, and they dress up and they basically act out the movie with people, and people are throwing stuff around in the theaters, and they're having an amazing time. And that to me is such a unique phenomenon, you know, of a cult classic.
I think that you hit it on the nail, right? The nail on the head. I think they're phenomenal. Isn't that what the word phenomenal means?
Yes, phenom. Yes,
a phenom is something that creates a largesse, a stirring, and an awakening in a way that it can shift a social philosophy. And I feel that it could be a person, it could be an entire genre of artwork, it could be technology, but in this particular cases, we're looking at cult classics as the phenomenal or as the phenom. Do you feel that, I mean, and the reason why I think, you know, you and I are having this conversation is we're age cohorts. So we really are kind of looking at, you know, 5 generations worth of classic films and literature, really. if you know what I mean. And I think that in
Mm-hmm.
those 50 years, we've really had a huge blossoming of what it means to have a social awakening.
Yeah.
Or would you agree, kind of?
Yeah. I mean, you could even put Star Wars as a cult classic. I mean,
It
there's
is.
so many, it is. And that one really is multi-generational. You know, but I don't know, to me, it's anything that goes beyond, I believe, what is expected, but not from a financial point of view, but from a social point of view. Whether it's tapping into the political arena, like a Starship Troopers or a Blade Runner, or something that has a statement about society. What was the Soylent Green film? Right, that's another. Logan's Run. That's another cult
Oh my God,
classic.
Logan's Run for me. Oh my God, you said the name, and I felt a sense of rising in my chest. Because I
Right,
was
right.
panicked because of that last run. And
Sanctuary.
that's right, the Sanctuary. And all oh my God, oof. I feel like Logan's Run, those particular diagrammatic visuals, I think kind of really taps into the Doctor Who universe as well. So
Yes,
maybe
yes.
that's right. Am I okay? So there is something very emotionally connective in terms of how we in terms of how we embrace something that
Mm-hmm.
later becomes a cult classic. So what do
Yes.
you think, like, so for instance, recently, which I think is actually going to be truthful, we recently saw Mandy last year, that was released
Mm.
through Legion M, with Nicolas Cage in it, and
Mm-hmm.
it is really fast becoming a cult classic. I've seen it many times. It's not something that's in my genre in the least, but I can
Mm-hmm.
really speak to the psychosocial and the psyche of this film because it's created for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's this
Mm-hmm.
psychedelic madness. Very painful film, but it's
Yeah.
psychedelic madness, and it's a throwback and an homage to an older style of film. And so I'm seeing that blossom as a classic, which is really interesting. Like, I mean, were you watching films in the 70s already? Do you recall?
Oh, sure. I think most of the ones that I recall, let's see. I mean, and I would sneak off to the movie theater when I was like 9 or 10 because it was only a couple dollars and I managed to just sniff it off. But like, I think it was like Fu Manchu with Peter Sellers.
Yes! Oh my God. Okay.
So stuff like that. I would catch these matinees of these really odd films, and I think that was kind of the beginning of the end in terms of wanting any kind of normalcy in my life. But because there was also a little comic store that was by the movie theater, it was called the Cogitator, and so I would bop into there and then hit a movie.
I see.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
very different for us growing up in the late 60s, 70s. We had a very different
yeah,
um we had a different social structure in terms of us being able to get to a film. For me,
yeah.
for my family structure, I couldn't do that. It wasn't like I could just pick myself up and say, "Hey, mom, at 10 years of age, I'm going to go with my friends to go see a movie. Can you drop me off?" That's not
Oh, I
something,
went by myself.
and I could not do that. That wasn't a
Oh,
possibility for me because of the social structure. Remember, I'm growing
mm-hmm.
up as an Indian girl, and it's like, no,
Sure.
no, God forbid, no, no,
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
oh my God, you're going to get corrupted. So
yeah.
I used to sneak out of my home to go to the comic book store around the corner in
Oh,
order
wow.
to read the comic books. It's not that they didn't want me to, but
Mm.
I wanted to have accessibility to them in a way that I wasn't deterred because I didn't have a male around. And I
Yeah.
was the youngest in the family, and mostly males were closer to my age.
Okay.
So you could see
Yeah.
where it was like that. So for us to go see films at that time, we had to have like that, a horde of family with us.
Mm.
So that's social structure. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
do you think that us growing up differently in and age cohorts, mind you, and we're from two completely different cities and states. Do you think that that had an influence in terms of our what we accepted, or what we like embrace as a classic or a cult favorite?
Sure. You know, to me, it really depends on your environment and your culture. Absolutely. I grew up with parents who were very supportive of the arts. My mom was a professional puppeteer and an artist, and my dad was a lawyer, but he supported the arts, and so they supported my own personal creativity. And I think it was just parental, like, just not knowing what to do, but it was kind of like benign neglect. They just let me go wherever. And so I went exploring. And so whether that meant, you know, grabbing Agatha Christie books at the library or sneaking off to go see a matinee, you know, taking my bicycle into the tiny downtown. It was before we moved to the city. And so, you know, I was able to do that. I mean, these days, I don't think kids can just freely do that. But I think from a socioeconomic point of view and from a cultural point of view, absolutely. I mean, what I might have liked, you know, in fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade might have had some similarities to maybe what you had seen, but I could definitely see where they diverge in that regard. But I think what in the cult classics, they seem to bridge that gap, I think, in some ways, because lots of people can relate to it. Like, take Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right? Who doesn't want to skip school and be in a parade? I don't know. I think a lot of people do. And I think a lot of people fantasize about some of these things that these movies do. I mean, Rocky Horror was amazing. I mean, you had gender bending, you had transvestitism, you had allusions to aliens and murder and all this stuff. But because it was a musical and it was just so campy, it kind of just, the seriousness of the issues that they're talking about. I mean, you even have Nixon coming on the radio saying, "I'm not a crook." I mean, there's even that part to it, right? But it's kind of like overshadowed. You don't really pay attention to it because you're like, oh, they're driving.
No. What's interesting in that film, as it is with Ferris Bueller's Day Off, for instance, and you have to, I mean, my goodness, they're literally an entire, you know, era apart. Like, I think they're over 10 years apart. It's still about the undertone is what's the social norm. The overtone is how easily we can challenge it and not you know, not fall apart or not be maybe judged, but not just basically not, you know, I'm trying to be PC. Because, you know,
no, but I get what you're saying, though. I get what you're saying.
You know, because, you know, I mean, cultural and spiritual norms at the time were telling us don't do these things because, you know, it's going to challenge the spiritual norms and philosophies and faith and dogmatic practice. So when you get a film like this, which is Rocky Horror or even Ferris Bueller's Day Off, it's challenging that. It's saying no, you can be an individual, even if you're a mad scientist individual. You can do what you want. So, right? Well,
I mean, and then you have because they're all bubbling up in my head now, all the John Hughes films, right? So whether it's The Breakfast Club or 16 Candles, or some of these others, right? And those to this day can still be multi-generational films because you can watch those and still relate to them. They're still relatable, even though they were made in the 80s and look dated. The subject matter themselves, I think, transcends time and space, and I think that's what makes a cult classic, is if it could span time, like Blade Runner and the Kurosawa films and even the Dirty Harry films, for instance. You know, the Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry films. You know, these while they might look dated, they still are relatable, and people can relate to them. And I think that's a big, I think that's a big aspect for a cult classic as well, right? And I think that's partly why Doctor Who is so popular. But even though it's not a movie per se, I mean,
Isn't
they're
it
movies,
interesting? But you might as well
it is
call it
true.
a cult classic in the same way, because it's 54 years and running. Because
Right.
culturally, it's become a very socially accepted classic part of the infrastructure of television. And isn't that what we're talking about? So shifting back to that exact thought, you are so completely correct about Star Wars, because I actually wrote an article, and that I just shared out because Galaxy's Edge was dedicated yesterday, and I wanted to write an article that explained how I thought we took that Star Wars created a social revolution.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And that's something I feel that cult classics end up doing. They create social revolutions and revelations for at least 2 generations of fans to be able to really take a good look at who they are and see what their possibilities are, and to start dreaming. And I think from my point of view, these films allow you to dream, or they prompt you to dream, or they inspire you to dream.
They insist that you dream, as in, don't dream it, be it.
Yeah. You got it. You so got
right?
it. So funny.
Yeah. But it's I mean, you could even expand this to things like, Sanford and Son and Archie Bunker and all these things, the Partridge Family, the Brady Bunch. I mean, these are all Ren and Stimpy. I mean, there's so much out there that could just.
But they are.
Either.
They are, because they created a social strata. Okay, so I love how we're tapping into the energy of what I was going for. So cult classics don't have to be just films, then, Mollee.
I don't think so. I think they could be anything. Books maybe be a little bit harder.
You think?
But, well, in some ways, yes, because I think in this age of convenience, the book itself, you don't find people clamoring for the book so much as the concept of the idea, right? Which is sad to me, because I'm a huge bibliophile. But, you're more apt to see people wanting to watch Game of Thrones than read Game of Thrones, for instance, right? So I think the cult classics, I think it has to be some sort of mass media, whether that's film or TV or, gosh, even radio, right? The old radio shows that people would, clamber into, like the Shadow Knows. So I think it has to be some sort of mass media, I believe, even though books can be considered mass media, but it's not quite the same.
Well, we traversed into that, didn't we? In the 90s.
Yes.
So you know what I'm referencing. In the 90s, there was a particular author who created a book series about this young little wizard who I think blew apart the cult nature of literature, because
gosh, you're so right. How could I not even think about JK? you're so spot on with that.
Yep.
You're so spot on with that.
I believe, because it was in the 90s, we were still in that social demographic where we had youngsters in the 90s, because I was raising them at that time, and so were you, where they were more likely, because readership was really being highly encouraged again, thank goodness. That the schools were very likely to encourage a student. Remember the reading, the Scholastic Reading Challenges?
Oh yeah,
for sure. I think we're a winner in terms of revamping the way people looked at classic versus cult versus camp literature, and then turned that into something that was more socially, multi-generationally, not just accepted but loved, right? Because we had a whole group of kids all of a sudden going back and looking at classic literature and saying, yo, man, this is amazing. Let's go
Well,
back.
to the point of obsession. Maybe obsession plays a role too
You got
with
it.
cult classics.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another aspect, like this passionate obsession. Not necessarily unhealthy. Well, I suppose it could be unhealthy too. But I think for the most part, people are. Some people are self-prescribed as, yes, I am obsessed about this genre, or Harry Potter or Doctor Who or whatever it is, right? But they are so enamored with it that anytime it comes on, like anytime Blade Runner's on, I can't turn away
It's very,
from it.
very difficult to turn it off. Isn't it not
Oh
right?
yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah. And I
So
think.
what? No, go ahead.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Uh-huh.
No, I was done. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the exact same thing for Fifth Element, for instance, because
Yes.
there's
Oh my
just
gosh, Fifth Element. Yes.
there's just no way multipass is going to be universal forever. Multipass is
Oh
a
yeah.
term that is not going to go away because it
No.
means so much.
I love multipass.
I know multipass, and because what is she saying? Look, I have the ability to be socially accepted. This is what this pass tells me.
And I
I
could
know
go
nothing
anywhere.
else. I know nothing else of what it is to acculturate into this social structure, but I do know that I have a multipass, and with that, I can go anywhere and do anything.
Yeah.
Jesus, she was just born. I mean, just think about the just the rhetoric that the element hands us to really, really, really delve into and dive deeply into it. But I'm going to pull us back a little bit more because we're going to the 90s, and I am thinking backwards again because I'm hell bent on going literature. And I do want to throw in classic musical theater because
Cats and
what
Cats
are
was big.
two of the longest running classical musicals out there?
Well, Cats and Les Mis, right? Were they?
Phantom of the Opera has surpassed.
Oh, Phantom of the Opera too.
Has surpassed it, and Phantom of the Opera has traversed literature, all genres, literature, film, multiple times, film, and then surgence and resurgence in the theater because it's a tale that everyone goes back to.
Yeah.
How many times everyone goes back to it? And Les Mis, over 25 years of retelling, coming back again in October, and guess who's going to see it again? Because you and I know that when we listen to "Can You Hear the Music Play?" and
chills, right?
And
the feels, all the feels.
It's so
all the feels.
Okay, so there you go, right? It's the feels. So a classic,
the feels.
A classic cultural hit ends up being something that hits us in the feels. In the long run,
right? Absolutely. I think that's it has to, because something can be a cult classic and someone might not get the feels from it because they simply don't like it. But it doesn't mean that doesn't mean it's not a cult classic, right? But I think that a huge part of that is that, yes, it absolutely generates the feels, that you absolutely are connected to it immediately, and that you relate to it on whatever the level is immediately. The very first time I saw Rocky Horror, I was like, oh my God, I love this. And then saw it subsequently a bazillion times, but for me, it was because of the live theater show and the people acting and the dressing up and the ritual of it. So I think there's ritual with this as well. There's some people who will dress up to go see the new, Harry Potter stuff, right? We saw that, all the time, right? For the new, what was it? Oh, golly.
Fantastic Beasts?
Yes, thank you.
The new films from Crimes Upon the Walls. I completely and absolutely, and I feel like, so we knew that going backwards to say Les Mis, and the way that kids and cultures paid homage was to bring it into their school theaters, where the kids could enact these either the books or the musicals, or just the plays themselves, and then that grows the classic nature of the genre, because then you're exposing people who probably couldn't get to the theater to see it, or couldn't get to the cinema to see something, or maybe didn't have access to get that book, as was the case with J.K.'s books when they first came out. It was very controversial how many people were going to allow their kids to read books about wizards.
Right. I'm like, why wouldn't you? I'm like, come on, people.
Well, again, it's all social structure. It's challenging the social structure. So,
well, another one is the Lemony Snicket books.
God, yeah. They're so, they're painful.
They are very painful.
They're so painful.
That was actually bedtime reading, because my kid loved them, absolutely loved them, and so a lot of his early reading was we'd be in story time. We'd be reading Lemony Snicket that was just so dark, but it's all good. Good life lessons.
No, it really is. It really is. And I know it sounds like to our fans who are listening that we're like all
I know. Please don't be horrified. I read my child Lemony Snicket.
And I am trying so hard to keep this reined in. It's just that we're such huge fans, so we're sitting here thinking to ourselves, there's just so much. When we first started to explore the conversation about what does it mean to be a cult classic and what do we love, when you and I were like throwing out all these titles and stuff, and we automatically went to films, and then afterwards I was like, but as I kept thinking about it, I 100,000%, if not even more, put all of the Harry Potter films into cult classics as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Even though they, of course, are box office hits. They're box office hits because they're not the best films in the world. It's because they're cultural classics based on a series of books that empathetically connected in so many ways to the reader, because they gave you a series of stories about all of these children who went through such horrific experience.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I think that there's so much more than just connecting. There's identification, and that's why those films have made such a social impact to the point at which we have theme parks based on them, and that will never be empty. And now we're about to launch another ride based on it, Hagrid's Magical Creatures ride.
Yep.
And why is that going to happen? Because people want the magic in their life.
Yes. Maybe that has to do a lot of it too, that suspension of self and suspension of disbelief and just escapism, right? We all want to escape from what we might consider drudgery. I mean, I don't know, there's probably like people who are out there who are happy all the time, but I think a good vast majority of us are not necessarily happy all the time. And so it's nice to have something to kind of sink your teeth into. Oh gosh, that reminds me of more films, but I'll stay on the topic.
Oh, God.
But it's like,
I'm not going to go down that route, but I'm not going to say no, because obviously there are horror films like, Poltergeist, which I actually love that. So, or many others, like for instance, The Exorcist, which are also take on the persona of being a phenom. And so I may not love those films, but I guess I understand, because people also emotively connect to those. And is it because the same thing? Is it magic and the suspension of disbelief? Is it escapism in the same way when you're talking about something like, as a horror film or a war film?
I think people like to get scared. Makes them feel better in the end when it's done.
Yeah,
it's an endorphin rush.
I mean, you're working on something that's based in horror, aren't you?
Yes. I work for a haunted house. Yes. And that's much, we act and we help build it, and it's tremendous fun. There's nothing quite like scaring people, but it is very fun. But yes, no, it's all endorphins. And I think you get endorphins from a good film, and you get endorphins from a scary film. I think that, when we watch Star Wars, our hearts are in our chests and our throats going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And then by the time it's done, we're like, oh, okay, phew. But I think it's the same for a horror film too. I think that these cult classics affect us in such different levels that I think the other really big aspect of a cult classic is that, again, when you're done watching it or reading it or listening to it, you discuss it, you talk about it and how it affects you. Right? I think if something is on that level, I think more people are apt to discuss it and talk about how it affects them personally. Kind of like what we're doing now.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I think that the whole point to our organization is that I think that's just what we do, right? Every show that we do is about looking at things from what affects us, what triggers those endorphins, what inspires conversation and personal growth. I think, but sometimes you have silly cult classics that literally are silly.
Oh, sure.
But like Animal House, which I am not a fan of, but I understand the favoritism of it because it's pure absolute rowdy escapism, and while it's not my cup of tea, I get it, and I don't want it, but I get it. So not everything is intellectual. That's okay.
Oh no, absolutely not. You have like Revenge of the Nerds and Porky's and all those films, of course. But do you feel like a cult classic has to have either like incredible music or cinematography, or like do you think that they like to make it into that genre as a cult classic that it has to have some of those things, or or it has like an amazing score, or like the artistry of the film, or do you think that that's a criteria for a cult classic?
It kind of can't be, right? Because there's so many that is so darn cheesy that, and the filming is in no way, shape, or form because they're B films, so they certainly don't have the budget to give us that beautiful cinematography or even the great score. However, I would say like the entire class of films in the Breakfast Club and the Big Chill, in that genre, those are
the Big Chill,
fabulous scores. And they were very identifiable scores because they use classic Motown, etc., 50s and 60s to really connect to us. So,
oh gosh, Kubrick. We've totally forgot Kubrick too, by the way.
That's it. That's oh yeah, I mean, come on. Oh my God. But I don't think so. Like if you just go back to Rocky Horror, the music was its own. It was all original. So Cats is original. All musical theater, unless it's a resurgence, it's also original. So why is what but those of course do have scores to them. Hey, I do think, for instance, though, in the Harry Potter series, the entire series, that look at who you have as your composer. Of course
John Williams.
It's oh my, come on. Did you want people to feel everything there was to feel? Then you put John Williams out there. I mean, Star Wars, hello. So
yes, exactly. Oh yeah. I mean, because okay, go ahead.
No, go, and I'll say it after.
Because like for me to get fully immersed into a film, I need the visuals and I need some music. But at the same time, if I'm watching like a silly camping movie, it has to capture my attention, right? It has to capture me somehow. Otherwise, I get bored. Like even in Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, they had some silly songs, and that kept your interest sort of. But I think back to some of these cultural classics and even the silly ones, and I think that they all have their place in history, mostly because I think they're small kind of Polaroids, if you will, of our culture at that time. They're kind of like time capsules, right? So even Animal House or Revenge of the Nerds or some of these ones that are like, oh, that are cringeworthy, there's still a snapshot in time. There's still a snapshot of our social taboos or our social pushing of the envelopes. And I think that's what makes them what they are. Because they you know.
No, I'm 100% in agreement with you. So right now we're focusing on the literature, film, and television from the English broadcasting, world. But it's the exact same with across the world. I mean, things fall into the same classic categories and typography in terms of how something becomes a classic. And it was really interesting because I asked you, and we were like, okay, well, let's explore other classics. And I am from an Indian background, so there are classic Indian films like Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham, which I'm not sure that you've seen, although I know you've seen Indian films that has extremely identifiable soundtrack to it, and people probably know the music more than they do the film, but the story of the film is an amazing story, and it has to do with family. And then Hum Saath Saath Hai, which is about family. And so they're just cultural classic films that people will always go back to across the globe that fall into the same, I guess, into the same definition of cult classic.
Sure.
I think you and I talked about like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Oh yeah.
And how I can literally just close my eyes and see the film.
Or Kung Fu Hustle, same kind of genre.
Kung Fu Hustle, when you're talking about a score and visual, a
beautiful.
film that intentionally brings you back to the classic B-roll kung fu film, but really, it truly actually it has more intelligence than that, and so they find a way to merge with these layers of intelligent conversation, extremely emotional, story, and then at the same time be slapstick. How the heck do you do that?
Right. Well, it's also, you got Bruce Lee, you got Enter the Dragon. There's so many of these different types of films out there. They're what I would call my rainy day movies. And I have a huge love of B and C and sometimes D movies, and I don't know why I torture myself with the D movies, but. I think that kind of final thoughts on this for me would be how much of the passion and obsession, to what lengths does it go for an individual?
That's a good question. That's a good question for another show, actually, Mollee. I really like that you brought it up. And why do we connect so? Why do we create such empathetic connections to dystopian societies? Because a lot of, I would say a vast majority of these social situations in these cult classics are dystopian societies, right?
Yes. Yeah, like Repo, for instance, the genetic opera.
I mean, let's put it in perspective, man. Fifth Element is like that. Blade Runner is like that.
Oh, yes.
Star Wars is technically like that. Star Troopers is totally like that.
Yeah.
Rocky Horror is, hello, come on. So, even in a sense, when push comes to shove, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz is living in an unusual situation, and Oz is a dystopian society.
It sure is.
If you look at the whole, if you look at the definition, so you're like, okay, isn't that an interesting, isn't that an interesting conversation? Oh, remember Apocalypse Now? Oh my God, sorry.
Of course.
I had to say that. because I was like, oh my God, that's straight out of the book. So you went from a book that's, 100% a cultural classic, iconic, historic classic, because we get taught it in school, and then it goes on to be one of the best-selling films. So
yes,
it's not campy, but it's it's just a retelling of something that was so raw. So I know we have to wrap. I want to just keep going on this conversation. There's so much for us to discuss. So I do think, though, that what you did bring up about what makes about looking at the largesse of exploring the emotional connection, what that means, and what really I think basically. Okay, if you could say it again, how you said it, but I don't want to misphrase.
Sure. So basically, it's how deep does that obsession and passion go, and how does it connect to our own personal fandom?
Yeah,
I think
that's exactly where I think we need to go out of that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because the utopia was first used in as the perfect society, and dystopia is a society that's on the outskirts. And if that's all you need to define a dystopian society, then I think it's super, super, super interesting.
Yes.
The vast majority of the genres we culturally, iconically love are dystopian. So
yes.
Let's keep going on this one. I just like, ta-da-da, we found some stuff. Yes, I'm so glad we did this conversation. We came up with some great stuff. I chatted away with you. You see how many notes I sent to you?
Yes.
It's so much. That last stuff, you have to send it back to me because that's just brilliant, I think. We could write a whole paper on this, Mollee B.
Definitely.
An entire essay, research essay. Yes, woohoo, science nerd.
Yes.
Okay, my darling, thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
And can you let our lovely audience know how to find you and what you're doing these days?
Sure. So I mostly live on the social media of Instagram, and of course I participate lovingly with both Diversity Geek Discusses and Man Bites Media and Man Bites Retro. So you can find my pontifications there.
Absolutely, word, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's always an absolute pleasure. So thank you for having me.
Oh, yay! And I was really happy to have you because I really wanted this to be an age cohort. And if you're not sure, why I would probably do that is because when I'm looking at something from a perspective, it made sense to have someone who's age relatable to me and is just as big a nerd as I am, and to be able to see that picture maybe similarly to me. And that way, we'd be able to present you the information in a way that's probably cohesive. So I'm hoping that that's what we've done for you guys today, that we've really been able to talk to you a little bit about what is iconically considered to be a cult classic. And we revolutionized it, I think, by calling many other genres cult classics today, cult classics and why we love them. And I think we gave a really good start to help everyone understand that. And as we move along in the series, we're actually going to be bringing you shorter episodes, say 20 or 30 minutes, where we actually delve into a specific cult classic, 1 or 2 per episode, like The Wizard of Oz or Starship Trooper or Star Wars or Galaxy Quest, which is one of my personal faves, or Blade Runner, also a personal fave of both of us, and Fifth Element and Les Mis, and etc. Because we want to really go more into the iconic, but also the emotive nature of why those things connect to us. So I'm excited. I know. Woohoo! So this is Neisha, I'm your geek mom, and I thank our lovely Mollee B Marcus for being on with us today. And we hope you have a great week, and we'll be back with you next week. Have a great one.